Imagine being a king loved by millions, but unable to sleep at night, not because of enemies, not because of war, but because of his own son who refuses to take responsibility, a son who may one day destroy everything he built with his life. This is the story of King Alaric and Prince Lucian. Long ago, in the glorious kingdom of Valoria, peace and prosperity filled every corner of the land under the rule of a wise king. That king was Alaric. He was loved not because he was powerful, but because he was fair. He solved problems by listening, not commanding. He helped the poor quietly, and he never ignored the smallest voice of his people. The people often said, "We don't fear tomorrow, because King Alaric takes care of today." But inside the palace, the king carried a heavy worry. His only son, Prince Lucian. Lucian was not cruel. He was not evil, but he was dangerously careless. He loved comfort more than responsibility. Sleeping late, feasts, hunting, music, and luxury filled his days. Whenever duty came, he avoided it. And his favorite words were always the same: "I'll do it tomorrow." One morning, King Alaric called Lucian. A serious dispute had broken between two villages over water supply. It needed attention. The king said, "Sit in the court today. Learn how decisions are made." Lucian nodded. "I will come, father." But that same morning, his friends arrived. "Lucian, there is a festival in the northern town. Come with us." Lucian hesitated only for a moment. Then he smiled. "I'll attend tomorrow." And he left. He never came to the court. The king handled everything alone. And the two villages left with tension growing between them. That evening, Lucian returned happily from the festival. The king looked at him and asked only one question: "Did you learn anything today?" Lucian shrugged. It was just one meeting. The king said nothing, but his silence was heavier than anger. A few days later, heavy rain damaged an important bridge connecting trade routes. Engineers warned it needed immediate inspection. The king told Lucian, "Go there today, understand the situation." Lucian nodded. "I'll go after breakfast." But again, his friends arrived. "We found a rare deer in the forest." Lucian smiled. "The bridge will still be there tomorrow." And he left. The engineers waited the whole day. He never arrived. And the next morning, the bridge collapsed. Carriages fell into the river. Merchants lost everything. When King Alaric reached the site, one merchant said with tears, "If repairs had started yesterday, this would not have happened." The king closed his eyes. He already knew the truth. That night, Lucian returned proudly from hunting. "Father, I caught a huge deer." The king looked at him and said quietly, "A bridge collapsed today." Lucian paused. "We will rebuild it." The king replied, "That is not the lesson." "The lesson is what happens when responsibility is delayed." Lucian said nothing, but for the first time, he felt something uncomfortable inside. Outside the palace, whispers began, at first small, then growing louder. An old farmer said, "King Alaric gave us peace, but who will protect us after him?" A merchant replied, "The king is wise, but the prince..." He stopped. No one needed to finish the sentence. The fear was already understood. That night, King Alaric stood alone on the palace balcony. Thousands of lights glowed across Valoria. Each light represented a family trusting their future. He whispered, "I protected them today, but who will protect them tomorrow?" For the first time, the king was afraid. The king called his oldest advisor. After listening, the advisor said, "Your Majesty, the prince does not fear losing the throne." That is why he does not respect it." The king asked, "Then what should I do?" The advisor replied, "Make him earn it, not inherit it." The king fell silent. A painful decision began forming in his heart. The next morning, royal trumpets echoed across Valoria. People gathered in confusion. A messenger read the decree. "The future ruler of Valoria will not be chosen by birth alone, but through a great trial of wisdom, courage, and responsibility. Any worthy young man may compete, including Prince Lucian." The kingdom froze. Inside the palace, Lucian laughed. "Compete for the throne?" He smiled confidently. "I am the prince. The crown is already mine." And he walked away, not knowing that this was the moment everything in his life had already begun to change. And for the first time in Valoria's history, a decision had been made that would either save the kingdom or destroy it forever. The royal decree had changed everything in the kingdom of Valoria. For the first time in history, the crown would not simply pass by birthright, it would be earned through a great trial, wisdom, courage, responsibility, and the entire kingdom waited to see what would happen next. But Prince Lucian was not worried at all. He still believed nothing could take the throne away from him. Months passed as preparations were made across Valoria. Young men from noble families trained day and night. They studied law, leadership, and history. They learned how to solve disputes, manage resources, and protect villages. Because now, the crown was not a gift, it was a test. On the day of the trial announcement, the royal courtyard was filled with participants. The king stood on the balcony. Beside him, Prince Lucian yawned lazily. "This is unnecessary," Lucian said. "No one can rule better than someone born for it." The king did not reply. He simply said, "Let the trial begin." The first test was simple but dangerous. Two villages stood in conflict again, this time worse than before. Because of the earlier delay in resolving their dispute, both sides had suffered losses. Now they were demanding justice. The candidates were asked to decide the solution. One by one, they gave fair and thoughtful answers. Then came Lucian's turn. He stepped forward confidently, but when the question was explained, he hesitated. For the first time, there was silence in his voice. He tried to speak, but his answer lacked clarity. It was emotional, not logical, not practical. The judges looked at each other silently. Lucian stepped back confused. He had never realized that ruling a kingdom required more than opinions. The second test involved a simulated crisis. A village was cut off due to floods. Supplies had to be distributed fairly. Time was limited. Every candidate rushed to plan carefully. Lucian, however, looked uncomfortable. He had never managed anything like this before. While others calculated, he acted impulsively. His plan failed midway. The system collapsed. For the first time, people in the crowd whispered, "The prince is not prepared." Lucian heard it, but he ignored it, or tried to. King Alaric watched everything without emotion on his face. But inside, every failure felt like a wound, not because his son was losing, but because his son had never learned to try. The advisor quietly said, "He still thinks the throne is a privilege, not a responsibility." The king replied softly, "That is what I fear." Days turned into weeks, and something changed in the palace. King Alaric began falling ill. At first it was weakness, then exhaustion. Then he could no longer walk long distances. The royal physician said, "He needs rest." But the king continued working, because the kingdom still needed him. One evening he called Lucian. Lucian entered the chamber slowly. The king looked at him and said, "Do you understand now what this kingdom needs?" Lucian hesitated. "Father, I am trying." The king shook his head slightly. "Trying is not enough when people depend on you." For the first time, Lucian felt afraid, not of losing the throne, but of losing his father. That night, the king's condition worsened. The palace fell into silence. Lucian rushed to his father's chamber. King Alaric lay weak on the bed, breathing slowly. The crown was placed beside him. Lucian held his hand, and the king spoke softly. "I did not want a perfect son. I only wanted a responsible king." Lucian's eyes filled with tears. The king continued, "A crown does not make a king. Responsibility does." He paused, then whispered, "Everything I built for you. But everything I feared was also you." Lucian lowered his head. The king gave a faint smile, then said, "If you truly want to rule, start thinking like someone who carries lives, not luxury." His hand slowly loosened, and then silence. King Alaric was gone. The entire kingdom mourned. The greatest ruler of Valoria was no more, and now the responsibility had fallen completely on Lucian. The crown was placed before him. For the first time, he looked at it not as power, but as weight. At first, Lucian tried to rule, but problems came quickly. Crops began failing. Villages argued again. Taxes were mismanaged, soldiers lacked direction. The kingdom that once ran smoothly began to weaken, and Lucian finally realized something terrifying. There was no one left to fix his mistakes. No father, no advisor strong enough, only him. One night, Lucian stood alone in the empty throne hall. He remembered the bridge he ignored, the court he skipped, the warnings he laughed at, and now every single decision had returned. He whispered to himself, "Father, I understand now." But it was too late to ask forgiveness. Only action remained. From that day forward, Lucian changed. Slowly, painfully, but truly. He woke before sunrise. He listened before speaking. He visited villages himself. He rebuilt broken systems. And most importantly, he stopped saying, "tomorrow," because he finally understood tomorrow never saves a kingdom. Only responsibility does. A crown does not create a king. Responsibility does, and sometimes life does not teach lessons with kindness. It teaches them with loss.